The radio crackled once, then went dead. Colonel Dmitry Sorokov pressed his boot into the chest of the wounded Marine on the ground, leaned down and said quietly, almost gently, "Tell your commander the ridge belongs to us now. Tell him we counted his men. Tell him we found them. All of them." He straightened up, adjusted his gloves, and walked away while the man was still breathing. That was the message. Not a bullet, not a bomb, a living witness left behind on purpose. Because Sorokov wanted Vance to know exactly what was coming, he wanted him afraid. And for one long, terrible night, it worked. Before we go any further, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button and follow this story all the way to the end. And drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The supply truck rolled through the gates of Faux Ravenfall just after 1,700 hours, kicking up a tail of red dust that coated everything within 20 feet. It was the fourth delivery that week, and nobody on base paid much attention anymore. Boxes of MRS ammunition crates, a replacement radio unit, 2 mechanics nobody had asked for, and according to the manifest, 1 additional combat asset classification redacted, authorized by someone 3 levels above the base commander's pay grade. Nobody noticed her at first. She was sitting in the back corner of the truck, bed, legs folded, a canvas duffel resting against her knee. Small, young-looking, dark-haired, wearing a jacket 2 sizes too big, and boots that had seen enough miles to tell their own story. She didn't jump down dramatically. She just stepped off. Quietly, like someone who had learned a long time ago not to announce herself. The rifle was the first thing anyone actually saw. It was strapped across her back diagonally, and even from a distance it looked wrong. Old, worn. The stock had been wrapped in dark cloth and tape, the barrel was scratched along its entire length, and there was a dent near the bolt housing that made Corporal Danny Reyes squint from across the yard and mutter, "Is that thing even legal?" Private First Class Aaron Tuck laughed out loud. He had been sitting on a sandbag wall doing nothing in particular, which was his specialty, and when he saw the rifle, he elbowed the man next to him. "Yo, you look at that." Sergeant Brody Callahan turned, looked, and let out a low whistle that wasn't impressed. It was dismissive. "What is that, a museum piece?" "That's a sniper rifle," Reyes said, walking closer now, curiosity overcoming decorum. "Who sent us a kid with a broken antique? Seriously, who signed off on this?" The girl didn't react. She adjusted the strap on the duffel, glanced once toward the command building like she was orienting herself, and started walking. Tuck called out, Hey, sweetheart, you need help finding the mess hall because the armory's that way and they're gonna laugh you out of it with that thing." She didn't stop, didn't turn around. Callahan crossed his arms. "Unfriendly." "She didn't even look at us," Tuck said, sounding genuinely offended. "Maybe she's deaf," Reyes offered. "Maybe she knows something you don't," said a voice behind all 3 of them. They turned. Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Webb was standing 6 feet away with a coffee cup in one hand and an expression on his face that was somewhere between tired and done. He was 41 years old, built like a man who had never once considered quitting anything, and he had a habit of appearing in conversations he hadn't been invited to. "Gunny," Callahan said, straightening slightly. "She came in on an authorization code I've never seen before," Webb said quietly, which means whoever sent her didn't want people asking questions. He took a sip of his coffee. "So stop asking questions." He walked away. The 3 men looked at each other. "That's not ominous at all," Tuck muttered. Commander Elias Vance had been at FOB Ravenfall for 11 months. He was the kind of officer who wore his experience the way other men wear old coats quietly without calling attention to it, but you could see it if you looked. 44 years old, 2 combat tours before this one. A scar along his left jaw from a piece of shrapnel in a place he didn't talk about at dinner. He had learned to read people the way some men read weather, not by what they said, but by what they didn't do. What they didn't say, where their eyes went when they thought nobody was watching. He was standing at the window of his office when the truck came through the gate, and he saw the girl before anyone else did. Not because she stood out, because she didn't. That was what caught his attention. Every other person who got off a supply transport moved with some degree of performance. Shoulders back, chin up, making sure someone important noticed them arrive. Even the quiet ones had tells. But this girl stepped off that truck like she was stepping out of a doorway she'd used 1,000 times before. No adjustment, no scan. Her body language said she already knew where everything was. That wasn't the posture of someone new to anything. His adjutant, Lieutenant Craig Harmon, knocked twice and pushed the door open. Commander, the new asset is on base. Personnel file came through about 20 minutes ago, but what? Harmon paused. Half of it is blacked out. Her service record starts and then just stops. 3 years of nothing. Then she shows up on a current authorization. Whatever she did in those 3 years, somebody decided we don't need to know about it. Vance kept watching through the window. The girl had stopped walking. She was standing in the middle of the yard now, and she was looking not at the buildings, not at the gate, not at the Marines who were staring at her. She was looking at the eastern ridge, just looking at it. Still as a post. What's her name? Vance asked. Volkova. Elena Volkova. The name meant nothing to him yet. Tell her to report to me in 1 hour, Vance said. And Harmon, don't mention the blackout record to anyone else on base. She reported in 58 minutes. Not an hour. 58. She knocked once, came in without waiting for an answer, and stood at ease without being told to. The rifle was still on her back. Vance noted that she hadn't gone to the armory, hadn't stored it, hadn't put it down. It was like a second spine, something she didn't separate from because the separation itself would cost her something. Volkova, he said. Commander, she said. You're younger than I expected. I get that. How old are you? A pause, not hesitation calculation, like she was deciding how honest to be. Old enough that it stopped mattering. Vance studied her. Up close, she was harder to read than he'd expected. Her face was young in structure, but not in expression. The eyes were the thin, dark level and carrying a specific kind of stillness that Vance had only seen in a few people in his career. People who had looked at very bad things and come out the other side not traumatized, just reorganized. Like their internal filing system had been completely rebuilt around a different set of priorities. Your file has gaps, he said. I'm aware. You going to explain them? No. He leaned back in his chair. You understand I'm responsible for everyone on this base. That includes you, which means I need to know what I'm working with. You'll know what you're working with, she said, when there's something to work with. It wasn't arrogance. He would have recognized arrogance. He'd dealt with enough of it from officers half again, her age, who had done a third of what he suspected she'd done. This was something else. It was the flat certainty of someone who knew the only thing that ever actually answered that question was a demonstration. Words were just noise before that. He held her gaze for a long moment. She didn't look away, didn't look down, didn't shift her weight, just waited. The eastern ridge, he finally said. Yes, she said. He hadn't asked a question. She'd answered one anyway. You noticed it when you came in, he said. Whoever's using it has been up there at least twice in the last 4 days. The soil disturbance pattern on the south face. The way your patrols avoid the northern approach, they've learned it without being told to. That means they've taken fire from there before, or they've seen the aftermath. Either way, the ridge is active. She paused. You knew that already. I did, he said. What I didn't know is how a girl who just stepped off a supply truck spotted it in 30 seconds. She didn't answer that one. He stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the yard. The Marines who had been mocking her earlier were still visible near the sandbag wall. Tuck was doing an impression of someone. The gestures suggested it was her, and Callahan was laughing. You're welcome, committee, Vance said. She glanced out. They're not wrong to be skeptical. You think skepticism keeps people alive. I'd rather they doubt me than trust me before I've earned it. He turned and looked at her again. Report to Gunnery Sergeant Webb at 0600. He'll get you a position. He paused. The rifle you want it logged into the system? She shook her head once. That's going to raise questions. Let it. He almost smiled. Almost. Dismissed Volkova. She turned and walked out. The door closed behind her with barely a sound. The mess hall at 1900 hours was its own contained world. And like all contained worlds, it had its own politics, its own social geography, its own unwritten laws. The table near the far wall was where the senior NCOs sat and talked about things they didn't want officers to hear. The table by the door was where the new arrivals clustered, still finding their footing. And the long central table under the single working fluorescent light that buzzed like an angry insect was where Callahan's circle held court. Elena took a tray, found an empty spot at the end of the bench nearest the window, and sat alone. She didn't eat fast, and she didn't eat slow. She ate like someone who had learned to treat food as a logistical problem, fuel quantity timing rather than an experience. She listened to everything around her without appearing to listen to anything. At the central table, Callahan was talking. I'm telling you, Webb looked nervous. Webb doesn't get nervous. You know what that means? It means whoever authorized this was someone who scares people like Webb. And people who scare people like Webb are either very important or very wrong. Or both, Reyes said. Or both. So we've got a teenager with a broken rifle on a classified authorization, and nobody will tell us what she's actually here to do. That's great. That's very comforting. Tuck had his arms folded on the table. You think she's some kind of a test like they send her in to see how we respond? Could be. Well, that seems like a waste of a supply truck. They once sent a psych team embedded as logistics support to evaluate stress responses in a unit that didn't know they were being evaluated, Callahan said flatly. So no, I don't think it's a waste. I think nothing that comes in with a blacked out file is ever what it looks like. There was a pause. Tuck lowered his voice, but not enough. You think she's any good? With that rifle, Callahan said. I think the rifle belongs in a war museum. I think it's so far past its operational lifespan that firing it is a liability. I think if you gave me that rifle and told me to qualify with it, I would fail the course and then submit a formal complaint. Elena took a sip of water. She can hear you, Webb said. He had appeared from behind Callahan with the same unnerving silence he'd used earlier in the yard. And now he set his tray down directly across from Tuck and looked at each of them in turn. Gunny. She's 6 feet away, Callahan, not 6 miles. There was a long, painful silence. Then Elena said, without looking up from her tray, the rifle is fine. Callahan looked over. With respect, it shoots where I aim it. That's what fine means. Another silence. Tuck opened his mouth. Webb gave him a look that closed it again. Elena finished her meal, collected her tray, and walked to the return window. She didn't look back. The table watched her go. She's either the most confident person I've ever met, Reyes said quietly, or she's completely insane. Webb picked up his fork. Eat your food. That night, the base did what bases do at night, and it quieted on the surface and stayed tense underneath. Patrols moved on rotation. The watch posts maintained their schedules. The generators hummed. The darkness outside the wire was exactly the kind of darkness that felt like it was watching you back. Elena was in the Eastern Observation Post by 2200 hours. Nobody had assigned her there. There was no order, no permission slip. She had simply gone there, found the position, settled into it, and become part of the dark. Webb found her at 2245 during his walk of the perimeter. He stopped when he saw her, and to his credit, he didn't flinch. He'd been in enough places to know that the sudden appearance of a person in the dark was only a problem if that person wasn't on your side. He stood for a moment watching her. She was still. Not the way people are still when they're forcing themselves to be the way people are still when stillness is their default. The rifle was resting across the concrete ledge in front of her, and she was watching the eastern ridge through the scope. You're supposed to check in with the watch rotation, Webb said. I know. You didn't. I know. He leaned against the wall beside her, looked out into the dark. You see something. Not yet, but I've been watching the ridge since 2130, and something moved on the south face about 40 minutes ago. Could be wildlife. Could be. But you don't think so? No. He was quiet for a moment. The way you looked at that ridge when you got off the truck today. It's what you look at first, she said simply. Elevated ground with clear sight lines to the center of the base. If someone wanted to make a statement, that's where they do it from. And whoever has been using it, they already know that. They've already made the calculation. How do you know someone's been using it? I know the signs. From training, she was quiet for a moment, then from being on the other side of it. Webb let that sit in the air. He was smart enough not to chase it. The others think you're either a test or a problem, he said. I know. Callahan isn't a bad soldier. He trusts what he can measure. Most people do. And you, she pulled back slightly from the scope, just enough to roll her shoulder once, then settled back in. I trust what works. Webb straightened. I'll put you on the watch rotation starting tomorrow. 0400 post-Eastern observation. Officially. Okay. Until then, you're technically unsanctioned. I know. I'm going to pretend I didn't find you here. Thank you, Gunny. He walked away. He'd gone about 15 steps when her voice came through the dark, quiet, and flat. Webb, he stopped. 3 days, maybe 4. Whatever they're planning, it's close. They wouldn't be watching this carefully if they weren't ready to move. He stood there for a moment, then he said, "Get some sleep when the shift ends." She didn't answer. She was already back at the scope. The next morning arrived the way bad mornings do, all routine on the outside, wrong underneath. The sky was pale and flat, the kind that doesn't promise anything, and the base hummed with the familiar noise of preparation and waiting. At 06:15, Elena was on the eastern post. Officially this time. Webb had done whatever Webb did to make things official, and there was a clipboard at the base of the ladder with her name on the rotation sheet. At 06:28, a patrol returned from the northern perimeter and reported nothing unusual. At 06:41, Vance took his morning walk of the base, a habit he'd maintained through 2 combat tours, because he believed a commander who only saw his base from inside an office was a commander who didn't actually know his base. He stopped when he reached the eastern post, looked up. She was there. He climbed the ladder, stood at the top, and looked out at the ridge in the early light. "Quiet night?" he asked. "Movement at 22:31 hours. South face. Single point stationary for approximately 12 minutes, then gone." He looked at her. "You were watching at 22:31? "Yes." "Your shift started at 0400? "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "Volkova, did you sleep?" Another pause, the kind that answered the question before the words did. "I'll sleep when I'm off rotation," she said. He exhaled slowly. "You're not useful to this base if you're running on empty." "I'm not running on empty." "When's the last time you slept more than 3 hours?" She didn't answer. "That's what I thought." He leaned on the ledge beside her, looked out at the ridge. Pale light was starting to define the shapes on it. Scrub brush, loose rock, the skeletal outline of a burned tree halfway up the slope. "What are we looking at?" "A prepared position," she said. "Probably 2, maybe 3 shooters. They've been establishing the range incrementally, small movements, different reference points each time. They're mapping the base, not just looking at it, mapping it." "For what?" "For a coordinated strike. If they're mapping range, they're planning to fire on multiple points simultaneously. That means they want to hit communication command and fire support in the same window. Fast enough that response becomes disorganized." Vance felt the cold that had nothing to do with the morning air. "You've seen this before," he said. It wasn't quite a question. She looked at him then, just briefly. "Yes." "How did it end the last time you saw it?" The silence that followed lasted exactly 4 seconds. He counted. "It didn't end well," she said. Then she looked back at the ridge. "But I learned what to look for." By 1100, the mood in the base had shifted the way moods shift when something invisible changes and everyone feels it without being able to name it. Patrols came back tighter. Voices at the watch posts were lower. Webb walked the perimeter twice in a single morning, which was not normal. And then Callahan came into the command building at 11:47, and the look on his face was the kind that precedes words nobody wants to hear. "Commander." He stopped just inside the doorway. "Reyes found something on the northern approach. Fresh marks on the ground 20 meters outside the wire. Boot prints, civilian pattern, but the stride is wrong, too controlled, too deliberate. And there's a small cut in the outer fence line. Not a breach, a test cut, measuring the tension." Vance stood up. "How fresh?" "Last 6 hours, maybe less." 6 hours, which meant sometime after midnight, which meant he picked up his radio. "Webb, Eastern Post, now." Static, then Webb's voice, "On my way." Vance turned to Harmon. "Get me a full perimeter check, every post verbal, confirmation, right now." "Yes, sir." He turned to Callahan. "You tell anyone else about the fence?" "No, sir." "Keep it that way for the next 30 minutes. I don't want panic, I want information." He reached for his jacket. "And Callahan, where is Volkova?" "Eastern Post, sir, still up there." He looked toward the window, toward the ridge. The pale light was gone now, replaced by the flat white of midday. The ridge sat there still and patient, like something that knew it only had to wait. "Tell her I want a full assessment in 1 hour," Vance said. "Everything she's seen, Everything she thinks she knows. She wants to be useful. Now's the time. Callahan hesitated, just a fraction. With respect, sir, how much weight are we actually putting on her read of the situation? She's been here less than 24 hours. Vance turned to look at him. He didn't raise his voice. He never raised his voice. When's the last time you spotted a prepared sniper position from across a yard in 30 seconds? Callahan said nothing. 30 minutes ago, you were telling everyone in the mess hall she couldn't shoot straight. Now I need you to set that aside because I think she's been right about everything since she stepped off that truck. And if she's right about what's coming, we don't have the luxury of skepticism. He grabbed the door. 1 hour, get her to me. Elena was still at the scope when Callahan climbed the ladder. He stood at the top for a moment, then said without the mockery from the night before, Commander wants to see you. 1 hour. Everything you've got. She didn't look away from the scope. Callahan, she said, yeah. The tree halfway up the south face. The burned one. He looked. He couldn't see anything unusual. What about it? There's a man behind it. He's been there for 22 minutes. He's not moving because he's already in position. She finally pulled back from the scope and looked at Callahan. Her face was still. Her voice was still. But her eyes were doing something else entirely. He's waiting for a signal. Callahan stared at her. Tell the commander, she said quietly, that we don't have an hour. She was already moving toward the rifle. Callahan stared at her for exactly 2 seconds. Then he was moving. He hit the bottom of the ladder at a run, and Elena heard his boots on the gravel below. Heard him shouting for Webb. Heard the base begin to shift, that particular shift. The one that every soldier knows in their bones when a place goes from waiting to reacting. She had heard it before. She had caused it before. She recognized it the way you recognize a voice you haven't heard in years instantly in your chest before your brain even processes it. She pressed her eye back to the scope. The man behind the burned tree hadn't moved. That was the thing that frightened her more than movement would have. Movement meant adjustment, reaction, improvisation. Perfect stillness meant discipline. It meant training. It meant he had done this before and he knew exactly what he was doing, and he was not afraid of being seen because being seen was already part of the plan. She adjusted the scope. 2 degrees left. Measured the wind. There wasn't much, but there was some coming off the ridge in a slow diagonal pull that would matter at this distance. She calculated. Not consciously, not the way you solve a math problem on paper. The way breathing works. The way balance works. It happened underneath thought in the part of her that had been built and rebuilt over years she never talked about. Her radio crackled. Vance's voice. Volkova, talk to me. One confirmed on the south face, she said. Behind the burned tree, 11 o'clock from my position, approximately 940 meters. He's stationary. Has been for 23 minutes. Can you take him? Yes. Hold, I need to know if he's alone. He's not. A pause. You see the others? No, but he's not moving, which means he's waiting for the others to be in position. You don't hold still like that unless you're the anchor. He's the anchor. She took a slow breath. There are others. I just don't know where yet. Vance came back on. How long do we have? If I'm right about the pattern minutes, not many. Another pause. She could hear something in the background on his and voice's movement. The sound of a base accelerating into alert posture. Rules of engagement require positive confirmation of hostile intent before Commander. She kept her voice level. He has a weapon. He is in a concealed position overlooking your base, and he has been stationary long enough to have established his range. That is hostile intent. The pause this time was shorter. Hold your position. Do not fire until I give the word. She didn't say anything. She looked at the man behind the tree. He still hadn't moved. In another life, in the life she didn't discuss, she would have already taken the shot. The calculation would have already been made, and the trigger would already have been pressed, and the situation would already be different. But this was a different kind of operation with a different kind of authority, and she had made a decision when she stepped off that truck to do this the right way. The legitimate way. She hoped the legitimate way was fast enough. At 11:52 hours, Webb reached the command building. He was breathing hard, not from exertion, but from the kind of controlled urgency that looks like calm from a distance and feels like a controlled explosion up close. Vance was already at the map table with Harmon and two senior NCOs, and the moment Webb walked in, Vance looked at him and said, "Tell me what you know." "She's been watching that ridge since before her official shift started," Webb said without preamble. "Last night she was up there from 2200 hours. I found her. I should have reported it. I didn't, because what she was doing wasn't wrong. It was just unsanctioned. And the movement she saw at 2231, consistent with what she's describing now, single point, deliberate, controlled. I thought it might be wildlife. She didn't." Vance put both hands on the table. "She told Callahan we don't have an hour. What's your read?" Webb didn't hesitate. "She's right." "And you can't know that, Marcus. You haven't—" "I know what right looks like," Webb said quietly. "In 20 years, I have met exactly 3 people who look at a battlefield the way she does. One of them is dead. One of them is running a classified program somewhere I'm not cleared for. And one of them is standing in an observation post right now telling you the clock is running." He met Vance's eyes. "Don't waste it." The room was very quiet. Then Vance picked up the radio. "Volkova, still here. The man behind the tree. On my mark." She was already settled, already still. The crosshairs had not moved in 4 minutes. Her breathing was 3 counts in 4 counts, out of rhythm so ingrained it required no attention. Her right hand was relaxed. Her left hand was relaxed. Everything was relaxed except the single small point of focus at the center of everything. The place where intention and physics in years of compressed experience met in a space smaller than a heartbeat. "Mark," Vance said. She fired. The sound of it rolled across the base like a thunderclap in a clear sky, sudden, enormous, and then gone. For a full second, nobody moved. Then everything happened at once. From the eastern ridge, 3 things occurred in rapid succession. First, the figure behind the burned tree dropped. Second, 2 muzzle flashes appeared on the north face positions that had not been visible, had not been known, had not been mapped by anyone on the base because they had been established in the dark patiently over days. Third, a radio somewhere on the ridge broadcast a single word in a language that wasn't English, and the valley picked it up and scattered. It distorted, unreadable except for the tone. The tone said execute. The base erupted. The first incoming round hit the western comm antenna at 11:53 hours and 40 seconds. The second hit the generator housing on the south side of the perimeter, and the lights in half the base went out. Somewhere near the motor pool, someone was shouting. Webb was out the door of the command building before the echo of the second shot had finished, already moving toward the perimeter wall, already on his radio, his voice sharp and controlled and completely without panic. Inside the command building, Vance stood at the map table and felt the particular cold clarity that combat brings to some people, the way everything non-essential simply falls away, and what's left is just the problem in front of you, and the next decision, and the decision after that. "Harmon, status on comm. Primary antenna is down, backup is still up. We can reach regiment on the backup, but it'll be slow. Get regiment. Tell them we're taking fire from the eastern ridge, multiple positions requesting immediate support." He was already moving toward the door. "And tell them we may have more incoming. This isn't a probe. This is a preamble." Harmon's head came up. "Sir, they took out comm and power first. That's not harassment fire. That's suppression before a ground assault." He grabbed his jacket. "They're coming over the wire, probably within the next 15 minutes. He was out the door. Elena heard the second and third shots from her position, heard the generator go, felt the shift in the base below her, the way you feel a current change in a river. She was already scanning. The 2 muzzle flash positions on the north face, she had them, fixed now in her mental map. She ran the numbers, ran the angles. From her current position on the eastern post, the north face shots were at the edge of her effective range, coming in at a bad angle. She could attempt them, but the probability of a miss increased to a level she didn't accept. She needed to move. She picked up her rifle, moved to the north corner of the observation post, reset. New position, new reference points. The wind had shifted 3 degrees. She registered it and adjusted without stopping. She found the first north face position through the scope. A man partially concealed behind a rock outcrop reloading. She noted his rhythm, 3 seconds between shots. She waited for the shot, waited for the reload sequence, pressed the trigger at 2 seconds into his 3-second cycle. His rifle didn't fire again. She shifted to the second position. This one was harder the shooter had moved, was using lateral cover more effectively, understood suppression in a way the first one hadn't. She tracked him for 40 seconds, which was 40 seconds she wasn't comfortable spending, and when she fired, she wasn't certain. She worked the bolt, watched. The position went quiet. Not certain, but quiet. Her radio. Volkova. It was Webb. 2 down on the north face. 2 quiet on the north face. I'm not confirming kills. Understood. We have a breach attempt on the eastern wire. 2 men with cutters, they're moving fast. She was already swinging the scope back to the base perimeter. I see them. Can you baha? Yes. 1 breath, 2. The first man at the wire dropped. The second man looked directly toward her position. She could see his face in the scope. The exact moment of recognition that something was wrong, and she fired. He ran. She let him run. Webb. 1 neutralized at the wire, 1 fleeing east. He's going to report back. Let him. We want them to know the wire is covered. She pulled back from the scope. Her shoulder ached in the way it always ached after sustained use, a deep structural ache that she had learned to ignore so thoroughly that ignoring it had become its own kind of habit. She rolled the shoulder once, pressed back in. Below the base was organized chaos, which was different from actual chaos. Organized chaos meant the people knew what to do. They were just doing a lot of it very fast. She could hear Webb's voice cutting through the noise, directing, redirecting, constant and controlled. She could hear Callahan's somewhere on the south perimeter, his own voice carrying the same quality, the edge of adrenaline, but structured, channeled. She could hear Vance's voice on the radio, crisp and measured, talking to regiment. And then she heard something she wasn't supposed to hear. Something not on any radio channel, but carried on the wind from the ridge movement. A large amount of movement, coming from the east. She shifted the scope to the tree line. They were coming out of it in a line. Not running, moving at a fast walk, weapons upspread in a tactical formation that said these were not irregular fighters and not untrained militia. These were soldiers. Disciplined soldiers moving with the coordination of people who had rehearsed this exact approach. She counted, then counted again. 14, 15, 16. Vance, she said into the radio, go. Ground assault, eastern approach, 16 correction, 18 personnel, trained formation, weapons up. They're 300 meters from the wire. A pause that lasted exactly 1 second. Then, all units, eastern perimeter, now. The base erupted again. Differently this time, not the reactive chaos of incoming fire, but the directed, purposeful movement of people who know where the threat is and are moving toward it. Vance was at the eastern perimeter wall in under a minute, and Webb was beside him, and Callahan was bringing his team from the south, and the base that 20 minutes ago had been conducting a normal morning routine was now compressed and focused and pointing itself at the eastern tree line. Vance pressed against the perimeter wall and looked out. He couldn't see them yet with the naked eye, but he trusted the voice in the observation post. Volkova, talk me through it. Lead element 40 meters from the wire now. They know we've seen them. Their pace increased when your people moved to the wall. They're committed. A beat. Sorokov is with them. Eastern flank hanging back. He's not leading from the front. Vance's jaw tightened. You can see Sorokov. I know his posture, she said. And the way she said it, flat, immediate, without elaboration, was the first moment that something about Elena Volkova stopped fitting neatly into any category Vance had been using. You don't know someone's posture from a description. You don't know someone's posture from a file. You know someone's posture from having watched them. Repeatedly, up close, he filed that away. He didn't have time for it now. Can you reach him from your position? A pause. The longest pause she'd given him yet. Yes. Then why? Because if I take him now, his unit loses command structure, and they may scatter in any direction, including through the wire, which makes them harder to manage than if they stay in formation. Another pause. And because I want him to see what happens next. Vance looked up at the observation post. He couldn't see her from where he stood. She was just a voice from above. What happens next, he repeated. His lead element reaches the wire, she said. I take the lead. The second rank stalls. Sorokov issues a new order. I take whoever he issues it to. By the third order, his formation is broken. His people are confused, and they're making decisions under pressure instead of executing a rehearsed plan. A breath. Pressure decisions are bad decisions. Webb was standing 2 feet away and had heard every word. He looked at Vance. His expression said something he didn't say out loud, which was, "Where did she come from?" "Do it," Vance said. What happened in the next 4 minutes would be talked about at FOB Ravenfall for as long as the base existed and probably longer. Not because of the tactics were sound, but because of the precision. The lead element hit the wire at 12:04 hours, and at 12:04 hours and 6 seconds, the lead man dropped. Not from anyone on the perimeter wall, from above, from the eastern post, 900 meters away, a rifle that everyone on base had called junk, held by a girl that everyone on base had called a child, put around exactly where it needed to go. The second rank stalled. A voice from the eastern flank, Sorokov's voice, it had to be, it carried the authorities, shouted something. One man moved in response, broke left, began directing the second rank to push right away from the wire gap. That man dropped at 12:04 hours and 41 seconds. A different voice, now higher, faster, less certain, questioning. The formation began to shift again, this time without the clean coordination of before. Two men moved toward each other where they should have been moving apart. Another man went to ground and stayed there instead of advancing. At 12:05 hours and 12 seconds, a third shot. The formation was broken. Not broken like a line in a battle, broken like a sentence that stops making sense halfway through. The remaining 15 men were still there, still armed, still dangerous. But they were making decisions individually now, not collectively. And individual decisions made under fire by people whose command structure has just been surgically removed are rarely good decisions. 3 of them began to withdraw, then 5. Then in a cascading effect that was almost visible in real time, the eastern assault began to fold back into the tree line. Vance exhaled one slow breath. On the perimeter wall, nobody said anything for a moment. Then Callahan said very quietly, 3 shots. She stopped a 16-man assault with 3 shots. Nobody answered him. Webb looked up at the observation post. Still nothing visible. Just the post, the concrete, the edge of the rifle barrel catching the flat midday light. 18, Reyes said. Callahan turned to look at him. She said 18. She corrected herself. She counted 18 in the time it took us to get to the wall. Another silence. Then Tuck, who had been the loudest, the most dismissive, the one doing impressions in the mess hall the night before, said something. His voice was different from the voice he'd used then. Quieter, more careful, like someone placing something fragile on a shelf. What is she? Nobody had an answer for him. Vance stepped back from the perimeter wall and turned toward the command building. He needed to update regiment. He needed to assess their communications damage. He needed to coordinate a sweep of the eastern ridge before Sorokov could reestablish his positions. He had a list of things he needed to do that would fill the next 3 hours and leave no room for anything else. He stopped, because there was something in the back of his mind that had been sitting there since she said it, and he hadn't had time to look at it directly, and now it demanded to be looked at. I know his posture. He turned to Webb, who was still at the perimeter wall. Marcus, come with me. Inside the command building with the door closed and Harmon sent to manage the radio, Vance stood at the map table and said, "She knows Sorokov." Webb looked at him. She said she knows his posture. She didn't say she recognizes him from a file. She didn't say she's been briefed on his physical profile. She said she knows his posture. That's a different thing. Vance put his finger on the map on the eastern ridge. Sorokov has been in this region for 18 months. Before this assignment, he was running a black operations unit in a theater I'm not cleared for. His personnel file is mostly redacted. He looked up. Elena Volkova's file has 3 years of nothing in it. He paused. 3 years. Webb was very still. What are you saying, sir? I'm saying that the girl who just stopped a coordinated ground assault with 3 shots from a rifle, everyone said was garbage. I want to know where she was for those 3 years. And I want to know why the man commanding the unit that just tried to breach our wire is a man whose posture she recognizes from 900 meters away. He straightened up. Because those 2 things are connected. And whatever connects them is going to matter. Maybe more than anything else that happened this morning. Webb said nothing. He looked at the floor, looked at the map, looked at nothing in particular. She's going to tell me, Vance said. Not today, but soon. Because whatever she's carrying, she came here carrying it on purpose. People like her don't end up in places by accident. He picked up his radio. Get her down from that post. Make sure she eats. Make sure she sleeps. She won't sleep. Tell her it's an order. Webb almost smiled. You think that'll work? Vance looked at the eastern wall at the observation post barely visible above it. No, he said honestly, but I'm going to try. And I did. He keyed the radio to Volkova. Static, then her voice even unhurried as if the last 40 minutes had been a quiet afternoon. Commander, stand down from the post. Come in. A pause longer than her pauses usually were. The ridge isn't clear, she said. Sorokov pulled back. He didn't leave. I know, we'll run a sweep. Don't. Her voice stayed level, but something in it changed a fraction. A degree of tension that hadn't been there a moment before. Don't send people up there yet. He's expecting you to sweep. He's going to have something waiting for whoever goes up that slope. Vance looked at Webb. Webb looked back. What do you suggest? Vance asked. Another long pause, the kind that preceded something significant. Let me go, she said. Alone. The command building was very quiet. Absolutely not, Vance said. He won't expect one person. He'll be watching for a patrol, a formation, a sweep team. The tension in her voice had smoothed back out, replaced by something almost conversational, the tone of someone making a reasonable argument about an unreasonable thing. One person moves differently. One person I can control the risk profile for. A patrol? She stopped. A patrol he already knows how to handle. He's done it before. Vance put the radio down on the table without responding. He looked at Webb. She's right about the sweep risk, Webb said quietly. If he staged a second element up there and we send a team, I know she's right about the sweep risk. Vance picked the radio back up. Volkova, you stay on that post. Nobody goes up that ridge until I have a different read on what's waiting up there. Clear. A pause. Clear, she said, and then quieter almost to herself almost. But the radio caught it. He's going to move tonight. She said it the way you say something you've known for a long time and are only now saying out loud. Not a prediction, a fact being acknowledged. Vance set the radio down a second time. He stood at the map table in the flat light of the middle of the day, the battle around him settling into the specific quiet that comes after contact. And he thought about a girl on an observation post watching a ridge, and a man on that ridge who she could identify by posture alone, and 3 years of missing records, and a rifle that everyone had called junk. He thought about what Webb had said. In 20 years, exactly 3 people. He thought about the shot she had taken this morning. Not the mechanics of it, the decision, the timing, the judgment about when to take it and when to wait and what waiting would cost versus what acting would cost. That kind of judgment is not trained, it is not given. It is earned in a specific and terrible currency that only one thing in the world accepted as payment. He thought about the way she had said, I know his posture. He said half to himself, what happened to you, Volkova? Webb heard it, he didn't answer. Some questions he knew answered themselves eventually. You just had to wait for the moment when the person carrying the answer decided the weight of it was finally more than they could hold alone. That moment was coming. He could feel it the way you feel weather not yet but close, building on the horizon behind everything quiet and inevitable. For now, there was a ridge to watch, and a man on it who had not left, and a girl in a tower who knew things about that man that she hadn't told anyone yet, and night was still coming. Night came the way Elena said it would, not gradually, not with warning, but all at once like someone had made a decision. At 1800 hours, the base was running on the backup generator and half its normal light. The comm antenna was still down. Harmon had a team on it working by flashlight, but the damage was more structural than anyone had hoped, and Regiment was getting only intermittent contact. The sweep of the eastern ridge had not happened. Vance had held that order the way you hold a card. You know, you only get to play once, and the ridge sat out there in the growing dark, patient and unknown and full of whatever Sorokov had left behind on it. Elena had not come down from the post. Vance had not pushed the order. He wasn't sure why. Maybe because some part of him understood that the post was where she needed to be, and that need wasn't about insubordination. It was about something much older and more specific than any order he could give her. So he had let it go for now, and she stayed up there in the flat gray of the afternoon and into the blue of early evening, watching. At 18:23 hours, she called down. Movement, north face, single person moving slow. They're not concealing, they want to be seen. Vance was at the radio in 4 steps. How many? 1, moving down toward the wire, hands visible. A pause. They're carrying something white. Webb was already pulling on his jacket. A flag. Or a trap, Callahan said from across the room. Same thing, Tuck muttered. Nobody told him he was wrong. Vance keyed the radio. Hold position. Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage. He looked at Webb. I'm going to the eastern wall. Sir, if this is a distraction, then I need eyes on what they're distracting me from. Get Reyes and 2 others on the south perimeter. Full alert, not visible from outside the wire. He was already moving. And keep Volkova on that scope. The figure reached the wire at 18:31 hours. Younger than expected. Not a soldier, or at least not dressed like one. Civilian clothes dust-covered. The white object turned out to be a cloth torn from something, wrapped around one hand. The other hand was raised open. Palm out. Vance stood at the wall and looked at Enda. Who are you? The young man said something in rapid accented English that took Vance a moment to parse. I carry a message from Colonel Sorokov. He says you should ask your sniper what name she used 3 years ago. He says she will know what it means. He says tell her Iron Lynx sends its regards. The silence that followed lasted exactly 4 seconds. Then Elena's voice came through the radio, and it was the first time since she had arrived on that truck that her voice carried something other than control. It was subtle, a tightness, a compression, the way a door sounds different when there's pressure on the other side of it. Don't let him leave. Vance looked at the young man who was already stepping back from the wire. Stop, he said. The young man stopped. Volkova, Vance said into the radio, and talk to me. A longer pause than any she had given him, longer than the one before the shot, longer than the one when he asked her to come down from the post. This one had weight in it, the weight of something that had been carried a very long time and had just been set down hard by someone else's hand. Bring him inside, she said finally. I'm coming down. She was at the base of the ladder before the young man was through the gate. Webb saw her face when she hit the ground. Not dramatic, not broken, just changed. Like a photograph that has been exposed to too much light. Still recognizable but different in a way you couldn't precisely name. Gunny, she said. Where's the commander care? Eastern wall, coming back now. She nodded once and walked toward the command building. Not fast, not slow. The rifle was still on her back and her hands were loose at her sides, and she moved like someone who had just made a decision that couldn't be unmade. They assembled in the command building at 18:47 hours. Vance, Webb, Harmon, Elena. The young messenger was in a separate room with Callahan, not under arrest, but not free either, somewhere in the bureaucratic no man's land that combat situations create when the rules are written for a different situation than the one you're actually in. Vance closed the door. He looked at Elena. She was standing near the far wall, not sitting, the rifle still across her back. Her expression was level. But her hands, he noticed, were not entirely still. A small, involuntary tension in the left hand, opening and closing by degrees so small that most people wouldn't catch it. He caught it. Iron Lynx, he said. Yes. Sorokov knows that name. Yes. Tell me why. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Webb briefly as if checking something. Then she looked back at Vance and said, because he was there when it ended. The room was very quiet. When what ended, Vance said, the mission. She shifted her weight slightly, the smallest adjustment. 18 months ago, there was an operation classified at a level I still don't have full clearance to discuss. 6-person team, Black Operations Unit, no official designation, operating under a call sign Iron Lynx. The objective was a communications intercept in a forward area, low visibility, no footprint, in and out in 72 hours. She paused. It took 11 days, and we didn't come out. Not all of us. Harmon made a sound, not quite a word, just the sound a person makes when something lands harder than they were ready for. Vance didn't make any sound. Webb didn't either. They had both heard enough of these stories to know that the sound came after, not during. Sorokov's unit found your position, Vance said. Sorokov's unit was supposed to be 60 kilometers east, she said. We had confirmed intelligence. They were 60 kilometers east. Except they weren't. Her left hand opened and closed twice. We had a leak. Someone above us in the authorization chain. We never found out who. By the time we understood what was happening, we were surrounded. 3 team members were down and Sorokov was... She stopped, started again. Sorokov walked through our position afterward. I was the only one left. I was in a hide site that none of the others knew about. Standard protocol emergency. Fallback, you go there if everything goes wrong, and you wait for 72 hours before attempting extraction. You waited, Vance said. 5 days, she said. Not 72 hours. 5 days. Because the extraction window kept getting compromised, and I kept thinking someone else had survived, and I needed to wait in case they came. She stopped again. Harder stop this time. Nobody came. Webb exhaled slowly. He didn't look at anyone. Sorokov walked through afterward, Vance repeated, bringing her back. He walked through and I watched him through a scope from 40 meters. I had the shot. I had it clearly. And her jaw tightened. I didn't take it because I was following the rules of engagement for an operation that was already over. And by the time I processed what that meant, he was gone. The silence in the room was the particular silence of people absorbing something they can't fix. That was 3 years ago, Harmon said quietly. Officially, Iron Lynx was listed as a training accident, she said. 5 people listed as killed in a non-combat incident. I was listed as a training casualty, critical condition, long-term medical leave. They gave me a number and a file and a story and told me to go away and be quiet. She looked directly at Vance. I went away. I wasn't quiet. Vance leaned against the table. He ran one hand across his jaw, a slow, deliberate gesture. The gaps in your file. I was finding him, she said simply. 18 months tracking where he went, what command structure he'd embedded in what operation he was running. He moved 3 times. I followed 3 times. He ended up here. She paused. I arranged to be sent here. The table was very still. You arranged, Vance said. I called in a debt with someone who owed me one. The authorization code that nobody could trace that was the currency. She met his eyes without apology. I didn't come here to make trouble for your command commander. I came here because this is where he is, and because 5 people are in the ground because of what he did. And the official record says it was an accident, and I am the only person alive who knows it wasn't. Vance looked at her for a long time. Not the calculating look he'd given her when she arrived, not the assessing look from the early morning. Something different. The look of a man recalculating not the situation but the person in front of him. What does the message mean, he said. Iron Lynx sends its regards. It means he knows I'm here, she said, and it means he's been waiting for me to show up. He wanted you to find him. He wanted me to come to him instead of him having to come to me. She shifted the rifle strap on her shoulder, a small adjustment. He's been waiting 3 years for the loose end to present itself. I'm the loose end, the only person who can testify to what actually happened out there. Vance straightened. He looked at Webb, who had been standing near the wall in the particular stillness of someone processing a great deal very fast. Marcus. She needs to not be alone, Webb said without waiting for the full question. If Sorokov sent a message, it wasn't just to rattle her. It was to make sure she understood the terms. He's not going to mortar this base to get to her, too messy, too much attention. He's going to try something precise, something that looks like combat loss. He doesn't have a shot on me from the ridge, Elena said. You sure about that? I've been up on that post since I arrived. I know every angle he has. The post itself is covered. She paused. The problem isn't the post. What's the problem? Vance asked. The problem, she said, is that I can't take him from the post. His position on the ridge is behind 2 rock formations that completely block the sight line from my elevation. To get a shot on him, I need to go up there. You asked me this afternoon, Vance said. I'm asking again. And I'm saying again, Commander. She said it without heat, without pressure. Just his title used as a full stop. He came here because of me. The assault this morning, 17 of your people at risk because of something I brought through your gate. The comm antenna down, the generator. Every man and woman on this base at elevated risk tonight because I am here and he knows it. She let that sit for a second. Let me go fix it. Vance turned away from her. He walked to the window, blacked out, no light, showing outside standard protocol, and stood with his back to the room. Nobody spoke. At 19:02 hours, a sound came from outside that nobody had been expecting. 3 short bursts of automatic weapons fire from the direction of the south perimeter, and then silence. Vance was at the radio before the echo finished. South perimeter, report! Reyes's voice came back fast and slightly breathless. Contact. 2 individuals attempted to breach the south wire. We engaged. 1 down, 1 fled. A pause. Commander, they weren't trying to get in. They were calling attention. As soon as we engaged, they stopped. It's like they wanted us to engage. Webb was already moving to the door. Vance grabbed his arm. Wait. He looked at Elena. She was already at the window, pressing her ear against the blacked-out glass as if listening for something the glass would carry. Her expression had changed again, sharper, faster, a quality of focus that had a different character from the focused calm she'd maintained all day. This was something more urgent. That's not a breach attempt, she said. That's noise. They're creating a perimeter of sound to mask movement. She pulled back from the window. Someone is already inside the wire. The words hit the room like a physical thing. That's not possible, Harmon said. The gate isn't the only way in, Elena said. The test cut on the north approach that Reyes found this morning, they didn't cut the fence. They measured it. They came back tonight and made a full cut in the same location during the assault this afternoon when everyone's attention was east. She looked at Vance. How many people are in this building right now who weren't on the morning roster? 3 seconds of silence. Then Vance said, Harmon, give me a full head count. Every person on this base. Right now. Harmon was on the radio before the sentence finished. Elena moved toward the door. Webb stepped to block it, not aggressively, just present. She looked at him. Someone is in this base, she said. Sorokov didn't send a messenger to rattle me. He sent a messenger to keep my eyes on the ridge while he repositioned. And the south contact, that's to pull your people away from the northern interior. Whoever came in through the north cut is moving towards something specific right now. Toward what? Webb asked. She looked at him. Toward me. Webb turned to Vance. Vance was already pulling his sidearm. At 19:11 hours, Harmon came back on the radio with a voice that was working very hard to stay professional. Commander, head count complete. We have 1 extra. Someone who is not on the roster is somewhere on this base. The lights in the command building went out. Not the generator, the building circuit. Local targeted, deliberate. Someone who knew exactly where the building's electrical panel was and had gotten to it. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved, and nobody could see anything. Complete dark. The kind that has texture. Elena moved first, not toward the door, sideways, along the wall, and the sound of her moving was so small that Webb, who was listening for it specifically, almost missed it. He heard the soft shift of the rifle strap, the nearly silent placement of one boot, then another. Then Vance's flashlight came on and Harmon's, and the room was full of sharp-edged shadows. Elena was against the far wall, the rifle not on her back anymore. It was in her hands. Lock this building, she said. Volkova, lock it. Now, if they cut the power to this building, specifically, it's because they need your command element distracted and immobile for a specific window of time. She was moving toward the door, which means what they're actually doing is somewhere else, and the window is closing. Vance looked at Webb one more time. Webb gave him the smallest nod he'd ever seen, barely a tilt of the head, the economy of a man who had learned to communicate in the dark. Go with her, Vance said. Webb had the door open before the sentence finished. The base in the dark was a different place entirely. Not pitch black, there were emergency lights on the generator circuit, casting the kind of low amber glow that creates more shadow than light and makes distances unreliable. Elena moved through it with a consistency of pace that Webb had to actively work to match. She wasn't running. She wasn't cautious either. She was moving at the speed of someone who has made all their decisions already and is now simply executing them. Where are we going? And he asked. The armory. Why the armory? Because if I were a Sorokov and I wanted to guarantee a target's death and make it look like combat loss, I would need to either get the target or get rid of the target's ability to function. She moved around the edge of a building, stayed close to the wall. He can't get to me in a locked command building, so he removes what protects the command building. The armory, Webb said. The radio equipment in the armory secondary room. If that goes, you can't reach regiment. If you can't reach regiment, you can't get support. If you can't get support, she stopped at the corner, looked. A base with degraded comms and no incoming support is a base that can be taken at leisure. Webb processed that in about 1 second. He's not trying to kill you tonight. No, tonight he's setting the conditions. He wants me to know it's him. He wants me to understand that he can reach into this base whenever he chooses. He wants me afraid and reactive, making bad decisions. She looked at him. That's what he did before. To iron links. He didn't hit us all at once. He tightened the circle for 4 days until we didn't have any good options left. And then he hit. And then he hit. She turned back to the corner. I'm not going to let that happen again. She moved. He followed. The armory was on the east side of the base secondary building, reinforced door, 2-person access required. They reached it at 1918 hours. The door was closed, but Webb saw it before she said it. The lock panel's indicator light was amber, not green. Amber meant the lock was engaged from the inside. Someone was in there. Webb raised his weapon. Elena put a hand on his arm lightly, not grabbing, just contact. He stopped. She pressed her ear to the door. Listen for 4 seconds. Then she leaned back and said very quietly, directly into his ear. 1 person, moving slowly. They haven't found the secondary equipment room yet. The panel access is behind the main rack, and you need to know it's there. She paused. I'm going to go in. Stay here. If someone runs, they run toward you. I'm not letting you go in there alone. You go in there with me, we make noise, they panic, they break something before we can stop them, or they have a weapon and we're in a confined space. She looked at him steadily in the amber emergency light. 1 person. I'm faster in small spaces alone. How do you know you're faster? Because I've done this before. He believed her. That was the thing. He looked at her face in that low, difficult light. And he believed her in the same way he believed very few people in his career, which was completely and without room for doubt. Not because she'd convinced him with words, because she had earned it hour by hour since she stepped off a truck that morning with a rifle everyone said was junk. He stepped aside. She took the override code from him, standard base entry. He gave it without being asked, keyed it into the panel and pushed the door. What happened in the next 40 seconds, Webb heard without seeing. Movement. Impact. 1 voicemail, not Elena, saying something short and sharp in a language that wasn't English. Another impact, heavier, the sound of something hitting the floor. Then silence. Then the door opened from the inside. Elena stood in the frame. There was a cut above her left eyebrow, small, already stopped bleeding. The rifle was still in her hands. Behind her, visible in the amber emergency light, a man was on the floor, hands zip-tied behind him, Webb zip ties from his belt, which he hadn't offered, and she had taken at some point without him noticing. The secondary equipment is intact, she said. He hadn't found it yet. Webb looked at the man on the floor, looked at the cut above her eye, looked at her hands, which were completely still. You're bleeding, he said. I know. Are you all right? She looked at him with the particular expression of someone who has been asked that question so many times in contexts where the honest answer was complicated that they've stopped knowing how to give a simple one. I'm functional, she said. He nodded. He could work with functional. He pulled out his radio. Commander, armory secure. We have a prisoner. Secondary equipment is intact. He paused. Volkova is... He looked at her again. She's functional. Vance's voice came back, and for the first time since the morning, there was something in it that wasn't pure command. Something that sounded briefly and unmistakably like relief. Copy that. Bring them in. Elena stepped out of the armory and looked up at the eastern ridge. In the dark, it was just a shape against the sky. But she looked at it the way she had looked at it since she first stepped off the truck, not with fear, not with anger, with the particular attention of someone who knows what they're looking for and is waiting for it to show itself. He'll know this didn't work, Webb said beside her. Yes. Which means tomorrow he tries something different. Yes. A pause. The base was quiet around them, not the quiet of safety, but the quiet of held breath of a place waiting to see what came next. Emergency lights, half power, 1 antenna down, 1 prisoner. 1 girl with a cut above her eye and a rifle that everyone had called useless, standing in the dark looking at a ridge. He's going to escalate, she said. How far? She looked at the ridge for another moment. When she answered, her voice was quiet and certain and carried the specific weight of someone who knows their prediction is going to be correct and takes no pleasure in it. All the way, she said, and the ridge said nothing, and the dark said nothing, and the base held its breath around them, and somewhere up on that slope in a position that couldn't be reached by any line of sight from the eastern post, Dmitry Sorokov was looking at a base he intended to own by morning and thinking about a loose end that had become somehow the most complicated problem he had ever tried to solve. He had expected fear. He had expected reaction. He had sent the message and pulled the power and staged the breach and positioned his man in the armory and expected the cascade of bad decisions that fear and darkness and pressure reliably produced in enclosed spaces full of people who thought they understood the threat they were dealing with. What he had not expected was her to take his man in 40 seconds in the dark without firing a shot. He sat with that for a moment. Then he picked up his radio and said quietly to the men around him on the ridge, "Change the plan." Change the plan were the two words that kept Vance awake until 0200 hours. Not because someone had reported them, nobody had, but because he had been in enough situations to know that when an opponent's first three moves fail in a single day, the fourth move is never smaller than the third. It is always larger, always more committed, always designed to account for everything the previous attempts revealed about what they were dealing with. And what Sorokov now knew he was dealing with was Elena Volkova, alive, armed, inside a defended base, and apparently as capable at 23 as she had been at whatever age Iron Lynx had recruited her, which based on the math of 3 years ago, was younger than anyone in the command building wanted to think about. The prisoner from the armory had given them almost nothing. Not because he was trained to resist, he wasn't, or at least not at any level that held up past the first 20 minutes of systematic questioning. He gave them nothing because he genuinely knew nothing. He was local hire, paid to get inside, find the secondary radio equipment, disable it, and get out. He had been given the override code, which meant someone with base access had sold it, and a floor plan that was accurate enough to get him to the armory, but not accurate enough to tell him where the secondary room was behind the main rack. He was expendable, Elena said when Vance relayed this at 2100 hours. She said it without satisfaction, just recognition. Sorokov uses expendable assets for the tasks that carry the most risk of capture. He never puts his own people in positions where they can be taken and questioned. Because his own people know things worth knowing, Webb said. Because his own people know everything. He runs a tight information structure. The people closest to him know the full operation. Everyone else knows only their piece. She shifted in the chair she'd finally accepted, not because she wanted to sit, but because Vance had made it a direct order, and she had calculated that refusing direct orders had a cost she wasn't ready to pay yet. The messenger this afternoon, the man in the armory tonight, those aren't his soldiers. Those are instruments. Which means his actual people are still on that ridge, Vance said. Yes, rested and formed, and now reconfiguring around whatever he's decided to do next. She looked at her hands for a moment. He has 12, maybe 13 people left after this morning. That's not enough for another frontal assault, not against a base on full alert. So he's going to do something else. What? Harmon asked from the corner. She looked up. I don't know yet. And that's the problem. When Sorokov runs out of the moves you expect, he goes somewhere you haven't thought of. That's what happened 18 months ago. We planned for 6 contingencies. He used the 7th. The room was quiet. At 21:43 hours, the prisoner was secured in the base detention space, a generous term for a reinforced storage room with a lock, and the command building was running on flashlights and one working desk lamp on the backup circuit. Harmon's team had restored partial communications with Regiment, enough to send a status report and receive one back. Regiment acknowledged the contact, confirmed support was being staged, and gave an ETA that was less than reassuring. 14 hours, Harmon said, setting the radio down. He didn't need to explain what that meant. 14 hours before any meaningful reinforcement could reach them. 14 hours during which the base would remain exactly as it was, one antenna down, half-power 27 personnel on rotation, one ridge they couldn't safely approach, and a colonel on that ridge who had just been told to change his plan. Vance looked at the number on the map, looked at the ridge, looked at Elena. You need to sleep, he said. I slept. When at 1600 to 1730, 90 minutes. That was 6 hours ago. I'm aware, Mo bucking. She met his eyes. Commander, you need me functional more than you need me rested. Right now, I'm both. If you take me off rotation and put me in a bunk, you lose the first one to guarantee the second. And that's not a trade that works in your favor tonight. He couldn't argue with the logic. He hated that he couldn't argue with the logic. 4 hours, he said. 0200 to 0600. That's an order, Volkova. I'll put Webb on the Eastern Post. She started to object. 4 hours, he repeated. Or I pull you from active status entirely, and you spend tomorrow sitting in this building, watching through a window. Your choice. She looked at him for a long moment, then at Webb. Webb's expression was carefully neutral. The expression of a man who had chosen his moment to have no opinion. 0200, she said finally. 4 hours. Thank you. She stood, picked up the rifle, and moved toward the door. At the threshold, she stopped, not turning around. The cut on the north approach, where they came through tonight. I want it sealed before I sleep. Real seal, not a visual check. I'll handle it, Webb said. She nodded once and walked out. Webb looked at Vance. She's not going to sleep. I know, Vance said, but I needed her to agree to try because if she doesn't slow down, she's going to miss something, and the first thing she misses is the thing that gets her killed. He sat down heavily in the chair behind the map table, the first time he had sat down since 0600 that morning. And I don't want her killed, Marcus. Not just because she's an asset, because she came here to finish something that should have been finished by someone with authority 18 months ago, and she deserves to be alive when it's over. Webb was quiet for a moment. Then, you believe her about Iron Links, don't you? A pause. Yeah, I do. He reached for his jacket. I'll go seal the north cut. At 0047 hours, Callahan found Elena on the eastern post. He stood at the bottom of the ladder for a moment, considering whether this was a situation that required him to be there. He decided it was and climbed up. She didn't look at him when he reached the top. She was at the scope the way she always was, the way she apparently always would be, until something forced her to be somewhere else. He stood beside her and looked out at the dark and said nothing for a while because he had learned in the last 16 hours that silence around this person was not the awkward thing it usually was. She inhabited it differently than most people did. She made it feel like a reasonable choice. I owe you an apology, he said finally. No, you don't. The stuff in the mess hall yesterday, that was Callahan. She still didn't look at him. You didn't know. You looked at what was in front of you and you made a reasonable assessment based on available information. That's not something to apologize for. He was quiet. Most people would be at least a little satisfied. The rifle thing alone, I'm not most people. No, he said. You're really not. He leaned on the ledge. 3 shots, 16-man assault. I've been doing this for 9 years and I have never seen anything like it. She didn't respond. Where did you learn that? He asked. All of it. Not just the shooting, the way you see things, the ridge, the fence, cut the armory. How do you move through a situation like that and not miss anything? A long pause. You stop trying to see everything, she said. You look for what's wrong, what doesn't fit, the thing that's almost right but not quite. Your brain flags it before you consciously know why. Another pause. You train it for long enough and it gets fast. How long? Since I was 16, he absorbed that. 16. He had been 16 when he was figuring out how to drive and how to talk to girls and how to convince his mother he'd done his homework. Who trained you? She was quiet for a moment. People who aren't around anymore. He understood that was as far as that went. He looked out at the ridge. You think he's going to hit us again tonight? Yes. When? Before 0400. Before the shift change, before people are most alert when the base is at its lowest natural energy point. She paused, but not the way he hit before. He lost the element of a surprise. He lost the asymmetric advantage of us not knowing he was watching. Everything he does now, we're going to see coming faster than he wants us to. She adjusted her grip on the scope slightly, which means he's going to try to make the speed of it the advantage instead. Hit fast, hit multiple points, overwhelm the response before it organizes. Like this morning, but with less warning and more concentrated. She pulled back from the scope slightly. Tell the commander, not as a request, as information. He needs to know before 0200. Callahan looked at her. The cut above her eyebrow had closed just at a dark line now in the ambient light. She looked tired in the way deep water tired looks, not on the surface, not in her eyes, but somewhere underneath everything. A tiredness that had been there, so long it had become structural. "You should sleep," he said. "Callahan." I know you're not going to, I'm just—" He stopped. Tried again. "This morning I thought you were nobody. Tonight I think you're probably the most important person on this base. That's a big swing in one day and I just want to, I don't know." "Say that I see it, what you're doing." She was quiet for a moment. Then so quietly he almost didn't hear it. "Thank you." He climbed back down the ladder and went to find Vance. At 01:48 hours it started. Not with a shot, with light. Two vehicles appeared on the eastern ridge, not moving toward the base, just stationary headlights, unaimed directly at the eastern observation post. Full beams at an elevation and angle that flooded the post with direct light. Elena pulled back from the scope, blinded, and the radio was in her hand before the second light came on. "Lights on the ridge, eastern approach. Direct beam elevation advantage. They're killing my sight picture." Vance was already on the radio from the command building. He had not been sleeping either. "Copy. What do you need?" "IR filter, if you have one. I need to see past the lights." "Webb, do we have IR scope attachment?" Webb's voice, "Yes. Armory, 2 minutes." "You have 2 minutes," Vance said. "What else?" "South and west perimeters. They put the lights on the east to pull eyes toward the east." Classic misdirection. "Callahan, south perimeter, full alert." Vance's voice was faster now, the command rhythm accelerating. "Tuck west wall, now." Callahan's voice came back 30 seconds later, and the edge in it was new. "Commander, south perimeter. They've cut the wire, full breach. I count—" A pause with gunfire behind it. "I count at least 8. The base erupted for the second time in 14 hours. But this eruption was different from the morning one. This one was dark and fast and came from multiple directions, and Elena was in the observation post without a working sight picture, watching blinding white light and knowing that somewhere below her the base was being hit, and she could not see what was hitting it. Webb reached the post ladder at 01:51 hours, the IR attachment in his hand. He was breathing hard. She took it from him without speaking, attached it in 11 seconds, pressed back to the scope. The lights were still there, but the IR filter cut through them. She could see the ridge. 2 vehicles she'd been right to, and beyond them movement. People moving away from the vehicles, not toward the base. Moving east. "Webb," she said, "the vehicles are a decoy. There's nobody coming from the east. They positioned the lights and drove away." He related. Vance's voice came back fast. "Then where's the primary south?" "Callahan has the primary. The south wire is the actual breach." She was already moving, repositioning to the south face of the observation post, resetting. "Different angle, different range. I need 30 seconds. "You've got whatever you can take," Vance said. The south wire breach was 400 meters from her position, closer than the morning shots. She found the breach in the wire, through the scope, found the movement coming through it. 8 people, Callahan had said. She counted 6 still moving forward. The other 2 had taken cover. Callahan's team had hit them. Then, 4 still advancing. She fired. Bolt, fired, bolt, fired. 3 seconds. 3 shots. 2 advancing elements stopped. The remaining 2 went to ground. The breach at the wire stalled. Callahan's voice on the radio, and in it something that hadn't been there in the morning, something that sounded almost like awe, quickly suppressed back into professionalism. 2 down at the wire, remaining elements have gone to ground. We're pushing to the breach point. Watch the north, Elena said. The west. They're not done. And then Tuck's voice from the west wall, cracking at the edges. Commander Westwall, there's a vehicle, big one, moving fast toward the gate, no lights. At 01:56 hours, Vance made the decision in 4 seconds. Rocket, do we have the AT launcher? Harmon, yes sir, 1 round. Get it to the west gate, now. A vehicle, moving fast, no lights. Vance had seen this before, not in this theater, not this combination of variables, but the template was familiar. A vehicle moving fast without lights toward a gate in the middle of a diversionary attack was not bringing a negotiating team. It was bringing mass and speed and the kind of simple, brutal physics that walls and gates were not designed to stop. He was at the west gate in 90 seconds. The AT launcher was there already shouldered by Corporal Mendez, who was 26 years old and had never fired it outside of training and whose hands, Vance noticed, were completely steady. The vehicle was visible now. 300 meters, no lights, high speed, coming straight. Elena's voice on the radio from the observation post, and there was something new in it, a compression, a tightness she hadn't shown since the messenger said Iron Lynx sends its regards. Commander, the vehicle. Don't fire yet. Volkova, we have an inbound. Don't fire yet. Something's wrong. A pause, 2 seconds, which was 2 seconds they didn't have. The approach angle is wrong. It's aimed at the gate, but the angle puts it offset by 4 degrees. If it maintains course, it hits the wall 15 feet north of the gate. Vance tracked the vehicle. She was right, slightly off-center. That could be driver error. It's not. At this speed, a driver aiming for the gate self-corrects constantly. This driver isn't correcting, because this driver isn't aiming for the gate. Her voice dropped half a register. He's aiming for the wall section where your generator housing is. The generator housing, north of the gate, 15 feet. Mendez, Vance said. Shift target, north, 15 feet. Mendez adjusted. The vehicle was at 150 meters. Work, Vance said. The sound was enormous. The flash was white in total, and for half a second it was brighter than anything else. And then the vehicle was stopped, and what had been moving fast was now not moving at all, and the gate was intact. And the generator housing on the north side of the wall was intact, and the base still had power. In the following silence, which lasted almost 4 seconds, nobody on the west wall said anything. Then Mendez lowered the launcher and said very quietly, "How did she know?" Vance didn't answer. He was already at the radio. Volkova. Generator is intact. Generator is intact. A pause. That was the last play he had tonight. He's out of resources for another 12 hours of minimum resupply. Reorganize, reassign. You have a window. Another pause. You have a window, Commander. Use it. He stood at the west wall in the aftermath, quiet in the specific smell of expended ordnance and relief, and thought about 4 degrees of offset in a generator housing, and a girl who had seen it from a scope 400 meters away in the dark and had been right. All units, he said into the radio. Sweep report. South breach, north cut, west approach. I want eyes on everything. Move. At 02:23 hours, the sweep reports came back. South breach, 2 enemy down, 4 fled. North cut secure web seal it held. West approach vehicle destroyed, no survivors, no secondary elements. The ridge dark, no movement, vehicles gone. The base was intact. 14 people had been sent at FOB Ravenfall in the last 18 hours in 4 separate operations coordinated and resourced and planned by a man who had successfully destroyed a 6-person black operations team with similar assets. 14 people in the base was intact, and the communication equipment was intact, and the generator was intact, and the count of casualties on Vance's side was 2 wounded, neither critically, and 1 cut above a sniper's eyebrow that had stopped bleeding before anyone thought to treat it. Vance went to the eastern post at 02:41 hours. He climbed the ladder and found her where she always was at the scope, watching the ridge. The IR attachment was still on the rifle. In the low pre-dawn dark, she was a silhouette with a rifle and a stillness that was different from the stillness he'd first noticed when she stepped off the truck. That stillness had been controlled. This one was heavier, the weight of a night that had asked a great deal from her and gotten it. He stood beside her. He didn't speak for a while. "You should be sleeping," she said. "You should be sleeping," he said. A pause. "I asked first. I'll sleep when regiment gets here." He leaned on the ledge, looked at the dark ridge. The generator. 4 degrees. How did you see that? She was quiet for a moment. "I've watched a lot of people move toward things they're trying to hit. There's a quality to directed movement. The body aligns to the target unconsciously, even when the person thinks they're concealing it. A vehicle aimed at a specific point holds its line differently than a vehicle with a driver who's making corrections." She paused. "It's not complicated. It just requires paying attention to the right things." "What are the right things?" "The things that don't match." He looked at her. In the scope light, the cut above her eye was visible. She had not let anyone treat it. He wasn't going to push that battle tonight. "Volkova," he said, "I need to ask you something." Not as your commanding officer, as the person responsible for the people on this base. She pulled back from the scope slightly, looked at him. When this is over, he said, when regiment gets here and we do a proper sweep of that ridge and Sorokov either runs or is taken, what happens to you? She was very still. I mean formally, he said. You came here on an authorization code that nobody can trace with a file that has 3 blank years in it. And you've spent the last 18 hours doing things that are going to be very hard to explain in an official report. I need to know what to write. He paused. And I need to know because I want to write something true, not something that disappears you back into a file. She looked at him for a long time. The ridge was quiet behind her. The base was quiet around them both. Somewhere below, Webb was running the perimeter. Callahan was securing the south wire. Tuck was probably on the west wall, still processing the fact that he'd been right about the vehicle doing 0 of the relevant math. I don't know, she said. And for the first time since she'd arrived, there was something in her voice that wasn't controlled. Not broken, she wasn't a person who broke, he understood that now. But unguarded. The particular unguarded quality of someone who has given everything they have and is standing in the moment after with nothing left to perform. You could testify, he said, about Iron Links, officially. With my support and regiment behind you, the classification doesn't hold the same way it did when you were alone. She looked at the ridge. It's not just about testimony. I know. 5 people, she said. 5 people who went into that mission and didn't come out of it. Graves that say training accident. Families who got a phone call that was a lie. Her voice stayed level, but the words had weight that the voice couldn't fully contain. It needs to be true. The record needs to say what actually happened. Not for me, for them. Then we make it true, Vance said. It came out more simply than planned. Not a promise dressed in caveats. Just a statement. She looked at him. Something in her expression shifted, not dramatically, not visibly enough that he could have described it later if asked. But he saw it, the moment when someone stops being entirely alone with something. You can't promise that, she said. No, he agreed. But I can try, and I'm a very stubborn person. She almost, not quite, but almost smiled. At 0309 hours, 2 things happened simultaneously that erased the almost smile and put the scope back in her hands. Webb's voice on the radio, Commander Ridge, I've got a signal someone on the ridge is transmitting. Consistent frequency, short burst. They're calling someone in. And Elena already at the scope, already seeing what Webb's instruments were hearing. He's still up there. He didn't leave with the vehicles, he stayed. Her voice had changed completely back to the flat, controlled urgency of a person in active operation. He's calling for a secondary extraction, which means he needs to move soon. A beat. He knows the window is closing. Vance was on his radio in a second. Webb, can we trace the transmission? Direction only. Eastern Ridge. North face approximately 300 meters up from the base of the slope. Elena said, I can reach that position. Volkova Baram, he's there right now, not tomorrow, not when he's repositioned, not when he's resupplied. Right now in one position, transmitting, and I have the angle. She pressed hard against the scope. Give me the shot. The rules of engagement require, he ordered the deaths of 5 people and spent 3 years making sure nobody could prove it. He hit this base 4 times in 18 hours. He put a vehicle full of explosives at your generator with your people 10 feet away. She stopped, breathed. 1 count in, 1 count out. I have the shot, Commander. The angle I need is right here from this post. I have it right now, and in 60 seconds, he completes his transmission and moves, and I lose it. The radio was silent. Vance stood at the base of the ladder. He could hear her breathing through the radio-controlled 3 counts, 4 counts, and he could hear the weight of everything she had told him. In this building and in this post and in the mess hall and in the command room, and he could hear 5 names he didn't know in the silence underneath it. And he could hear his own responsibilities to the 27 people on this base, and the 2 wounded, and the one with a cut above her eye, who had spent 18 hours saving all of them from a man who had spent 3 years making sure she had no legal standing to do anything about him. He closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. Then he opened them and said, "Take it." She fired. The sound rolled across the base, out, across the valley up the slope of the eastern ridge, And then it was gone, and there was silence, and the ridge was dark, and the transmission signal that Webb had been tracking went silent at exactly 0311 hours and did not resume. Nobody on the base spoke. Webb came on the radio at 0314 hours. His voice was very quiet. Signal is gone. No movement on the ridge. Elena pulled back from the scope. She sat down on the concrete of the observation post, which was the first time Vance had seen her sit anywhere without being ordered to. She sat with her back against the wall and the rifle across her knees, and she looked up at the sky, which was beginning, just beginning at the eastern edge to show the pale gray that precedes dawn. He climbed the ladder, sat down beside her, which was not something commanding officers generally did on observation posts at 3 in the morning. He did it anyway. They sat in silence for a while. The base hummed quietly below them. Webb's voice on the radio running the perimeter, everything measured and calm. Callahan on the south wire, Tuck on the west wall. The generator running. The backup comm talking to regiment. 14 hours until support arrived. "Is it done?" he asked. She was quiet for a moment, looking at the gray edge of the coming dawn. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "I think so, but I won't know until we sweep the ridge and I see it. We'll sweep at first light, together." She looked at him. "You don't have to." "Together," he said. She looked back at the sky. The gray was spreading. In another hour, it would be light enough to see the ridge clearly, every rock, every position, every place a person had stood or lain or watched from. Every place she had been watching from the other direction. Her hands were still on the rifle, but they were still in a different way than they'd been all night. Not the tight stillness of a person holding something in. The looser stillness of someone who has set something down. "Webb was right about you," she said. He looked at her. "What did Webb say, Webb?" "He said some people look at a battlefield differently." She paused. "He said in 20 years he'd met exactly 3. Vance was quiet for a moment. "He told you that?" "No, I heard him tell you from up here." She glanced down at the base at the command building window. Sound carries differently than people think in enclosed spaces near open posts. He laughed, not loudly, just a short, surprised exhale that became something warmer. "How long have you been hearing things you weren't supposed to hear?" "Since I was 16, she said. And this time when she said it, it didn't carry the weight it had when she'd said it to Callahan. It was lighter. Not quite humor, but adjacent to it. The first thing she had said since she arrived that wasn't entirely serious. He leaned his head back against the wall and looked at the same sky she was looking at. Below them, the base breathed. Around them, the dark thinned. And on the ridge that had watched them all night, nothing moved and nothing transmitted. And the silence was a particular silence of something that was finally after a very long time over. Or close enough to over that the difference would wait until morning. Dawn came in quietly the way things do after a night that has taken everything from everyone. At 0427 hours, the sky over the eastern ridge was pale gray, bleeding into the kind of blue that doesn't commit to anything yet. The base was running on controlled exhaustion, people moving, doing their jobs, because jobs were the structure that held everything upright when the adrenaline was gone and the body was asking hard questions that the mind wasn't ready to answer. Elena had not slept. Vance had not slept. They had sat on the observation post until 0340 hours, not talking much, watching the ridge lose its darkness degree by degree, and then Vance had climbed down and gone to prepare the sweep, and she had stayed until the light was sufficient, and then she had climbed down too. Webb was at the base of the ladder when she reached the ground. He looked at her the way he had been looking at her since the armory, with the specific attention of someone who has revised their understanding of another person completely and is still in the process of adjusting to the new version. "Ready," he said. "Yes." He handed her a radio, a secondary piece, since her primary had taken a knock against the armory wall the night before and was producing intermittent static. She clipped it to her jacket without comment. "Vance wants 8 people on the sweep," Webb said. "Yumi, Callahan, Reyes, 4 others. Standard formation, staggered approach, eastern slope. Tell Callahan to keep the formation loose," she said. "Tight formation on that slope gives a secondary element 1 decision point to hit instead of 8. Spread them." "Already did," he said, and she looked at him just briefly, with something that was neither surprise nor gratitude, but some combination of both that didn't quite have a name. He had been doing that all night anticipating what she would say, acting on it before she said it, closing the distance between her knowledge and the base's response by simply paying attention. It was the kind of teamwork that didn't announce itself. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet. We still have a ridge to walk up." At 0449 hours, the sweep team assembled at the eastern gate. 8 people, weapons up, spaced at irregular intervals the way Elena had specified. Vance was there, not leading from behind, not watching from the wall. Standing in the line jacket on sidearm, holstered like a man who had decided this particular thing required his physical presence. And that was the end of the discussion. Callahan looked at the commander and then at Webb and said nothing. Reyes looked at the ground. Tuck looked at the sky. Elena looked at the ridge. "Same rules as any sweep," Vance said to the group. "No unnecessary exposure. Nobody moves ahead of the formation without calling it. If you find something, you call it, you don't touch it." He paused. "Volkova has the lead read. You hear her call something, you move on it." "Clear, clear," Callahan said. She started walking. The slope was steeper than it looked from the post, and the footing was uncertain in the early light, loose, rock-compressed soil. The occasional patch of scrub that gave way underfoot in ways that required recovery. She moved up it at a steady pace, not fast, not cautious, just consistent. The rifle was in her hands now, not on her back. Her eyes moved in the pattern she always used, near middle, far near cycling, without ceasing looking for the things that didn't match. At 0507 hours, she stopped. The team stopped behind her, a ripple of stillness moving back through the formation. She crouched, looked at the ground, looked at the rock face to her left, stood back up. "Someone was here," she said to Webb, who was immediately behind her. "Within the last 6 hours, the disturbed soil here and the scrape pattern on that rock face, someone moved through this exact point in a hurry. Moving upward." She pointed. They were going to the north face position. "Sorokov," Webb said, "or someone with him." She started moving again, slightly left now, angling toward the north face. "After I fired, if he survived, which I don't know yet, he would have moved to the nearest pre-established cover. The north face position was their strongest fixed point. That's where he goes." "And if he didn't survive?" Callahan asked from further back. She didn't answer that immediately. She moved 3 more steps. Then someone else went there, and we need to know who and what they did when they got there." At 0521 hours, they reached the north face position. It was exactly what she had expected it to be: established, deliberate, the product of days of patient preparation. 2 fixed points each with a clear sight line to a different section of the base. Equipment left behind: 2 spent casings, a range card, a radio handset with a cracked screen. The radio was still on. Its display showed a frequency and a call sign that Webb photographed without touching. Elena stood in the second position, the one further right, and looked down at the base below. From here, you could see the eastern post clearly. You could see the command building. You could see the west gate. She had been looking up at this ridge for 36 hours. Now she was looking back down from it, and the experience of the inversion was strange and clarifying in equal measure. "He was here," she said quietly. "This is where he was when I fired. This is his position." "Was," Webb said. She looked at the ground around the position, studied it for a long moment. Then she moved 20 feet to the right along the rock face, crouched, and went still. Webb watched her. "What do you see?" "Blood," she said. The word hit the formation like a stone hitting water. Everyone went still. She didn't say it with satisfaction. She said it the way you say a factual thing that has complicated emotional weight, flat on the surface, everything else underneath. "Not much. A transfer pattern. Someone sat here briefly, then moved. The direction is north, along the ridge." Vance came forward, crouched beside her, looked at what she was looking at. "He's wounded." "Yes." "And moving." "Yes." He stood up. "Can he extract if he's wounded and moving north?" "There's a road 4 kilometers north. If he has pickup stage there, and he would, Sorokov always has staged extraction, then yes, he can extract." She stood too, looked north along the ridgeline. Her expression was the one he had seen just before she fired the night before. Not anger, not urgency, but a focused, quiet certainty that had no room in it for anything that wasn't the next decision. "You want to follow," he said. "I need to follow. The sweep team. The sweep team stays and finishes the documentation. This is one person wounded moving along a ridge I know better than he does right now because I have been looking at it for 36 hours. She looked at him directly. Give me Webb and let me go. Webb was already looking at Vance. Vance ran the calculation. Wounded target 4 kilometers to a road early morning light. Elena Volkova with a working scope and 36 hours of pattern knowledge about this specific terrain. The calculation did not take very long. Webb, he said, go. They move fast. Not running on that terrain in that light was how you turned an ankle or missed something critical underfoot. But fast, the kind of fast that requires constant small decisions and no hesitation between them. Webb was in good condition and he worked to stay with her, and she did not slow down for him, but she did not leave him behind either. She moved as if he was a factor she had already accounted for. At 0538 hours, she stopped again. Put her hand back, flat stop. He stopped. She pointed. 30 meters ahead, a shape that the early light made ambiguous. She raised the scope, looked through it. Then she lowered it and said very quietly, he's down. They approach carefully the way you approach something that might still be dangerous even when it looks like it isn't. Webb had his weapon up. She had hers. They came at him from 2 angles, staggered neither in the other's line of fire. Dmitry Sorokov was sitting against a rock with his back straight and his hands visible, which was either a gesture of surrender or the position of a man who had run out of the energy required to do anything else. He was wounded in the left side. The shot from the observation post had not been clean, had caught him at an angle, and he had been moving on it for hours, which was the kind of punishment that extracted a specific price. His face was gray. His breathing was audible from 10 feet away. He looked at Elena when she came within his line of sight. He did not look surprised. Volkova, he said. His voice was hoarse, and underneath the hoarseness, there was something that might have been not quite respect, but the particular acknowledgement that passes between people who have been trying to destroy each other and have arrived at the end of that process. Sorokov, she said. I told them you weren't dead, he said, after the mission. I told them there was a body unaccounted for, and they said the numbers were sufficient. They didn't want to search. He coughed, once controlled. I should have pushed harder. Yes, she said, you should have. I want you to know the intelligence failure, the leaked position. That wasn't me. She looked at him. I know. That stopped him. Whatever he had expected her to say, it wasn't that. You know, he said. I've had 3 years, she said. I know exactly what you did and what you didn't do. What you did was execute an operation against a position that was handed to you. You didn't create the leak, but you knew afterward that it had come from inside the authorization chain. And you didn't report it. You covered it. You let 5 deaths get classified as training accidents and you moved on. She crouched down to his eye level. Her voice stayed level and her hands stayed still. And everything about her was the same controlled steadiness it had been since the truck, except her eyes, which were carrying everything the rest of her refused to show. That's what you did. You didn't pull the trigger. You just made sure nobody ever asked who did. The ridge was very quiet. Webb stood 6 feet back, weapon still up, watching both of them. Sorokov looked at her for a long time. The gray in his face had deepened in the last 2 minutes, the blood loss doing its slow, patient work. What happens now, he asked. You're going to be extracted by a medical team, she said. And then you're going to be questioned by people with the authority to act on what you tell them. And you're going to tell them everything. The leak, the source, the authorization chain, who knew, and who covered, and what the real record looks like. She paused. All of it. And if I don't, then I have 36 hours of documented operation, 2 surviving witnesses to everything you attempted against this base, a prisoner who can testify to your authorization, and a radio handset with your call sign and frequency that is currently being photographed by a United States Marine. She held his gaze. You will tell them, Colonel. The only variable is how much you decide to cooperate with the process. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked away at the ridge at the morning sky. There were 5 of them, he said quietly. It wasn't a question. He knew the number. There were 5 of them, she said, and their records say training accident, and their families got a phone call that was a lie. And you are going to help me fix that. A pause. His breathing was labored now, each exhale carrying a small, involuntary sound. He was running out of time before the blood loss made this conversation irrelevant. Webb, she said without looking away from Sorokov. Call Vance. We need medical at our position. Webb had the radio up in 2 seconds. Commander, we have Sorokov. He's wounded, he's alive, and he needs medical. North Ridge, approximately 3.2 kilometers from the base. Vance's voice came back, and in it was something that wasn't quite disbelief and wasn't quite relief, but lived in the space between them. Copy that. Medical is moving. Hold your position. She looked at Sorokov. He was looking at the sky. Whatever he was thinking, he kept it internal, which was probably the last disciplined thing he had the energy to do. It didn't have to be this, he said finally, not to her specifically, to the air, to the morning. No, she said, it didn't. At 0612 hours, the medical team reached their position on the ridge. At 0641 hours, Sorokov was being carried down the slope on a field stretcher, alive in custody, with 2 Marines on either side who had been told by Webb to treat him as a high-value prisoner and not to speak to him, and who were following that instruction with the focused seriousness of people who understood that whatever this man was, he was important in ways they didn't fully know yet. Elena watched them carry him down. Webb stood beside her. He didn't say anything. He understood that this was a moment that required presence, not commentary. At 0658 hours, they reached the base gate. Vance was there. He looked at her, the full look, the one that took in the cut above her eye, and the 36 hours of no sleep, and the rifle still in her hands, and the expression on her face that was not triumph and not relief, but something quieter and more complicated than either. You got him, he said. He's wounded and in custody, and she said, getting him is what comes next. What I got this morning is the possibility of getting him. He almost smiled. You are the most precise person I have ever met. I've been told that. It wasn't entirely a compliment. I know. At 0730 hours, regiment's advance team arrived, 2 vehicles, 4 personnel, a field communications specialist, and a JAG officer named Captain Shelby, who was approximately 30 years old and had the look of someone who had been briefed on the situation during a fast drive and was still processing it. She went directly to Vance, shook his hand, asked 2 questions, got 2 answers, and then looked at Elena with the expression of someone who has been given a file and met the person inside it and found the 2 things don't quite match. Volkova, she said. Captain, I've been briefed on the authorization irregularities around your arrival. I assumed you would be. There are going to be questions. I assumed that too. Shelby looked at her for a moment, then at the rifle, then back at her face. The prisoner Sorokov. He's willing to cooperate. He indicated willingness. Whether that holds through formal questioning is a different variable. We have people good at formal questioning. I know, Elena said. I've met some of them. She paused. Captain, I need to be present when he is questioned, not as a subject, as a witness. I'm the only living person with first-hand knowledge of what happened to Iron Lynx. Whatever he tells you needs to be corroborated by someone who was there. That's me. Shelby was quiet for a moment. That's not standard procedure. No, Elena agreed. It isn't. Another pause. The JAG officer looked at Vance, who was standing 6 feet away and had been listening without pretending not to. He said nothing. He gave her nothing, no indication, no direction, no subtle nudge. He left it completely in her hands, which she understood was its own kind of support. I'll make the request, Shelby said finally. I can't promise the outcome. I know, make the request. At 0812 hours, Callahan found Reyes and Tuck in the mess hall, and the 3 of them sat around the table that had been Callahan's table since he arrived, the central table under the buzzing, fluorescent light, and for a long time nobody said anything. Their food sat in front of them, mostly untouched. The base had the quality of a place that is still running on the momentum of an emergency that has just ended, not yet settled into whatever comes after. Tuck spoke first. I keep thinking about the rifle. Don't, Reyes said. I can't help it. I literally said to her face that it was garbage. Well, not to her face, but she heard me. She told us she heard us. I know, Callahan said. And then she saw. Tuck stopped, shook his head. 3 shots this morning, 2 last night at the wire, the vehicle, the armory, and then she walked up that ridge and came back with the guy. He looked at the table. We called her sweetheart. I know, Callahan said again. How do you sit with that? Callahan was quiet for a moment. He had been thinking about it since the observation post the night before, since she had said thank you in the small, unguarded way that made it clear she didn't expect it and hadn't been working toward it. You learn from it, he said. That's all you can do. You looked at what was in front of you and you got it wrong. You don't get to unfeel that, but you can make sure you remember it next time you're about to do the same thing to the next person. Tuck nodded slowly. She's something else. Yeah, Reyes said. She really is. At 0900 hours, Vance found Elena sitting outside the command building with her back against the wall and the rifle across her knees and her eyes closed. Not sleeping, he could tell by her breathing, too alert, too shallow for sleep, but resting in the particular way that people rest when they need to be still for a moment without having to interact with anything. He sat down beside her the way he had on the observation post. He was developing a habit of sitting beside her instead of across from her, and he suspected that was intentional on some level he hadn't fully examined. Shelby is going to get you the access, he said. She called back 20 minutes ago. The request went up 2 levels and came back approved. You'll be present for Sorokov's formal questioning. She opened her eyes. When, tomorrow, they want him stable and treated first. That's reasonable. She looked forward. Thank you. I didn't do anything. She made the call. You didn't block it, she said. In my experience, that's often the same thing. He looked at the base around them. The activity of normalization, people repairing, restoring, debriefing, the machinery of recovery running steadily through every department. It was the part of operations that nobody made movies about, but that was in his view actually harder than the contact itself. Because during contact, you didn't have time to feel anything. After it, you had all the time in the world. What are you going to do, he said, after this, when the questioning is done and the record is corrected and everything you came here to do is finished? She was quiet for a moment. I don't know. I've been thinking about that since about 0300 this morning. I spent 3 years knowing what the next thing was. Track him, find him, get here, stop him. She paused. I haven't thought past that in a long time. You could stay, he said. He said it simply without dressing it up, which was the only way he knew how to say things that mattered. Not just this base, the work. You have skills that take most people 20 years to develop, and you're 23. That's not something that should go back into a redacted file. I'm not exactly conventional. No, but conventional wasn't what stopped 16 men at a wire this morning with 3 shots. He looked at her. You said last night you stopped surviving and started living. I don't think you know what that means yet. I think you know what you're done with carrying this alone, but what you move toward, that's still open. She looked at him for a long time. The cut above her eye was fading to a thin, dark line. Her hands on the rifle were still. Everything about her was still, but it was the still of a person who has finally, after a very long time, stopped running, not from something but toward nothing. The still of someone standing at the beginning of a different kind of life and not yet knowing what to do with the open space of it. I don't know how to teach, she said. You taught Callahan something in one night, he said. You taught this entire base something in 36 hours. You just didn't use a classroom. She looked away. Something worked in her jaw, the small, involuntary motion of a person holding something in that is getting harder to hold. 5 people, she said. Yes. I need the record to say what happened. I need their families to know the truth. I need it to not be a training accident in a file somewhere that nobody ever opens. She stopped. Her voice stayed level, but the effort of keeping it level was for the first time visible. After that, I don't know. But after that, I'll have room to figure it out. I didn't have room before. You'll have room, he said. I'll make sure of it. She looked at him sharply. You can't promise that either. No, he agreed, but I told you I'm a very stubborn person. At 1100 hours, Webb came to find her. She was at the Eastern Post again, not because she needed to be, not because there was active threat, but because it was the place she knew best on this base. And knowing a place well was a form of comfort that she understood in a way that other forms of comfort hadn't quite reached her yet. He climbed up without being asked and stood beside her. Regiment's full team arrives this afternoon, he said. They're going to want a debrief. Full account everything from arrival to this morning. I know. It's going to take a while. I know. He was quiet for a moment. There's something I need to tell you, he said. And I want to tell you before the formal debrief because I think you deserve to hear it from a person instead of from a report. She looked at him. The name on the authorization code that got you here, he said. The debt someone called in on your behalf. I ran it this morning after the sweep. I have contacts at the level where those codes come from. He paused. It was General Patricia Holt. She was the oversight officer for the original Iron Links authorization. Elena went very still. She's been carrying it, Webb said. Oh, question? 3 years. She knew the intelligence failure wasn't an accident, and she couldn't prove it, and she couldn't pursue it without exposing herself, but she never closed the file. When your path crossed with Sorokov's location, she got the code to you. Elena said nothing. Her hands on the scope were completely still. She's going to testify, Webb said. She already filed a voluntary statement 2 weeks ago. She's been waiting for Sorokov to be in custody before releasing it. She needed the physical evidence to back the testimony. He paused. She needed you, Elena. She needed what you just did. The use of her first name, which he had never used before, was not accidental. She heard it for what it was. Her eyes were bright. Not tears or not only tears. Something larger than tears. The specific overwhelm that comes when you have carried something alone for so long that the moment someone reaches out to share the weight, your body doesn't know what to do with the sudden absence of it. She knew, Elena said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. She knew, Webb said. She's been fighting it from the inside for 3 years. She just needed someone on the outside doing the same thing. He looked at her steadily. You weren't alone in this. You thought you were, but you weren't. She looked out at the ridge. The sun was up fully now, the morning well underway. The ridge, ordinary and ordinary looking in the full daylight, just rock and scrub, and the remnants of positions that had been abandoned. Nothing threatening, nothing hidden, just a slope in the morning sun. She pressed her fingers to her mouth. 1 breath. 2. The controlled breathing, 4 counts and 4 counts out, that had gotten her through the night and the morning and 3 years and 5 names in an impossible distance. Okay, she said. Just that. Okay, the word that means I'm still here and I can move and I understand what comes next. Okay, Webb said back. At 13:47 hours, regiment's full team arrived. At 14:12 hours, the formal debrief began. At 1600 hours, Sorokov's first formal questioning session started with Elena present, seated across a table from a man who had known her name for 3 years and had spent all of that time hoping she would either disappear or come to him on his terms. She had come on her own. He told them everything. Not quickly, it took 4 sessions over 2 days, and there were moments where he pulled back and had to be coaxed forward, and there were details that required verification and cross-referencing and the patient, unglamorous work of building a legal record that would hold. But he told them everything because he was a wounded man in custody, facing charges that carried weight he couldn't shift alone, and because Elena sat across from him through every session with the same level, controlled steadiness she had carried since she arrived, and somewhere in that steadiness was the thing that wore him down more than any legal pressure could the simple, undeniable fact that she had come for him and found him and stood in front of him and was still standing, and everything he had done to make sure that would never happen had failed. The record was corrected. It took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of documentation, testimony, cross-referenced intelligence, voluntary statements from General Holt, physical evidence from the ridge, and the kind of bureaucratic grinding that does not make headlines but changes lives in ways that matter more than headlines do. 5 files were pulled from the training accident category and reclassified. 5 families received calls that were true instead of calls that were lies. 5 names, in a record that had been built to forget them, were given back the weight of what they had actually been. On the day the reclassification was finalized, Elena sat in the command building of FOB, Ravenfall, still there, still on the base on a temporary assignment that Vance had made permanent enough to matter, and she read each name aloud to herself once quietly in the specific privacy of a room she was alone in. Then she folded the document and put it in the inside pocket of her jacket close to her chest, and she walked out to the eastern post and climbed the ladder and stood at the top and looked at the ridge. Ordinary. Quiet. The burned tree halfway up the slope was just a burned tree, now stripped of everything it had meant for 36 hours. She breathed. 4 counts in, 4 counts out. And then slowly she let it go different, not the controlled breathing of a person maintaining function under pressure, but the slower, fuller breath of someone who is not under pressure. Someone who is, for the first time in 3 years, somewhere close to safe. When Vance found her at 1700 hours, she was still there, but she was not at the scope. She was standing at the edge of the post, looking out, not at the ridge, not at a target, not at anything specific, just out, at the open air and the afternoon light and the world beyond the wire. He stood beside her. "It's done," he said. "It's done," she agreed. He looked at her profile. The cut above her eye was gone, healed clean, no scar visible. She looked in this light very young, which she was, which he kept having to remind himself of because nothing else about her mapped to that number in any way he was used to. "Callahan asked about you today," he said. She glanced at him. "What did he ask?" "He asked if you were staying," he said, and I'm quoting, "he said he's been doing this 9 years, and he learned more in 36 hours from you than in the previous 9 years combined. And if you're staying, he wants to keep learning, and if you're not staying, he'd like to know where you're going so he can think about following." She was quiet for a moment, then, "Callahan said that, word for word. Webb was there, he'll confirm." She looked back out at the air. "And what did you tell him?" "I told him I thought you were staying," Vance said. "I told him I thought you'd decided." She was quiet for a long time. The light changed the way light does at that hour, going golden and specific, making every edge clear and every shadow long, and everything feel briefly like it is exactly what it is and nothing else. "I'm staying," she said, not because she had nowhere else to go, not because the next thing hadn't presented itself yet, because she had looked at the ridge for 3 weeks and the ridge was just a ridge now, and the base below it was full of people who had called a rifle junk and then watched it save their lives and had the honesty to sit with that, and a gunnery sergeant who anticipated her and a commander who sent medical instead of arguments. And because she had spent 3 years learning how to end something, and it turned out that ending it left room for something else. And this right here was the something else. "Good," Vance said. She reached into her jacket pocket and touched the folded document there. 5 names reclassified, returned to truth. She left it where it was. She didn't need to take it out. She knew what it said. She picked up the rifle, settled it across her back where it belonged, and turned away from the ridge. The base was below her, running and breathing and moving the way it always did, ordinary and real and alive. She climbed down the ladder and walked into it. And this time she was not arriving. She was staying, and that was an entirely different thing, and she was only 23 years old, and she had the rest of her life to learn what it meant. The rifle on her back was the same rifle it had always been. Scratched, worn, wrapped in cloth and tape. The same rifle that had been called junk at a gate while the dust from a supply truck was still settling. It had never been junk. It had just been waiting like she had, for the moment when the right person pointed it at the right thing, and that moment now over had changed everything it needed to change. That was enough. That was more than enough.